Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and all the better for spending some quality time with you, and I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to get that quintessential perfect drink, whether it's something cool and refreshing, something alcoholic and sizzling, or something warm and stimulating. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the pulsating, throbbing, uplifting music pumped in a rhythmic, euphoric sequence, the passionate, tuneful lyrics and harmonious beats inflamed everyone's hearts as people sang, dancing joyfully along to their favourite 80s tracks, some obliviously ignorant as to how tone-deaf they actually were. But no one cared a jot. Everyone was here for a good time. The bright fluorescent lights of the disco were flashing, winking and alternating in blazing vibrant colours from reds, yellows, greens, reds, whites, purples and pinks, setting the dance floor ablaze with their twinkling, sparkling hues. Everyone danced with smiling faces, throwing their arms in the air, gyrating their hips in provocative circles, thrusts, twists, pirouettes, and of course some rather showy manoeuvres with the legs, willfully throwing their inhibitions to the wayside like unwanted, discarded garments that they no longer desired to wear. I was moving my body to Eye of the Tiger. The electrifying lyrics were addictive. You couldn't help but get onto that dance floor and dance. It was like that for everyone, as the 80s music was literally sensational. There are no words to describe the music of the day. The tall, dark stranger approached me with a shy, reticent reservation. Maybe he was asking me to dance, as I was out there on the dance floor dancing with my best friend and my sister Jasmine. He was talking to me, but I couldn't hear a single word he was saying. I'd seen him before. He was easy on the eye, quite attractive really. But then again, under these lights, everyone looked rather good. His mouth moved up and down, but his words were drowned out by the loud, vibrating, rocking music. "What?" I shouted. "I'm sorry. I can't hear you." The young man attempted to speak louder. "Would you like a drink?" he asked me. I nodded. "Thanks," I said. "I'd love a lime and lemonade." "With a tot of vodka, of course," he said, giving me a knowing wink. No, I insisted. "I don't drink alcohol." "Fair enough," he said. His olive skin, handsome face registered disappointment. His hazel eyes betrayed a level of annoyance. I knew exactly what he was thinking. I was a party pooper. I didn't care. I had to draw the line somewhere. I'd grown up with an alcoholic mother. I knew exactly what alcohol did to families. In my case, it had torn my family to shreds, ripped us to pieces like a paper shredder. I could remember the days when my mother forgot to pick me and my sister up from school. It became a regular event in those early years. Invariably, she would be found lying in a bush somewhere, spaced out from drinking too much. It was my father who would come and collect us with his tail between his legs, after having been informed by the principal that we hadn't been collected yet. It would be so embarrassing for the two of us, left behind by my mother, seemingly abandoned, forgotten, neglected, like orphan kittens lying on the wayside that nobody wanted to adopt. Those were the unfortunate days when my mother would fail to go shopping, that is, for food. Alcohol she'd always remember. So we were forced to eat rice and butter for our meals, for the pantry was running dry, with only a scattering of staples from some old dry bread to pasta and rice. My mother would be lying passed out on her bed, once again completely plastered, unfit to even brush her own hair. My poor father was naturally at his wits' end. He'd invariably tried his utmost to get her the very best, most professional psychological help, counselling and support. He'd even placed her in rehabilitation centres and clinics which had drained his pockets of sizable amounts of money that we could ill afford. But to no avail, for nothing brought my mother out of her alcoholic frenzy. Each one of these illustrious centres that claimed miracles failed catastrophically for our family. For indeed the longest my mother had managed to remain sober was about 3 weeks. Then she was back on the booze again, like a hamster on its wheel. My father was an honourable, reserved, quiet man. He never said much, but his helpless, tortured, tormented expression was permanently ingrained in his face, as if set in stone forever. It said a lot. My heart would break for him, over and over again, into thousands of pieces. I could see his earnest blue eyes were like deep tragic pools of sadness, regret, disappointment, loneliness, for he knew that the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago on holiday in Bali was in that body somewhere, but her mind had been hijacked, held to ransom, expropriated by the booze. Now she was gone from us forever, almost as if she'd died tragically and suddenly in an accident. It was like my dad was now in mourning for what could have been, for the lost days when we could have spent quality time together as a loving family, for the wasted times that had been whittled away by that booze. I know he only stayed with my mother to appease us, because he was the one that was forced to assume both paternal roles. It wasn't easy for him. He was the solid, dependable one in the family, the rock that never failed to support us. He was the one that helped us with our homework, tucked us to bed at night. He was the one that wiped our tears away when we grazed our knee, kissing it better. He was the one that took us to the movies, gave us a listening ear when we were sad. Where was my mother all this time? Lying somewhere in a drunken stupor. It was so tragic. There were, of course, those treasured, fleeting moments when the mother I once knew and loved would resurface like a seal, randomly rising from the watery depths of the deep ocean for a breath of much-needed fresh air. In those lucid moments of clarity, she would apologize profusely for her deplorable behaviour, promise us that things would change, but her words were hollow, empty, meaningless, insipid, redundant, insignificant. For we knew in a moment she would be wallowing in the bottle of gin again, like a pig returning to its own muck, her eyes rolling in the back of her sockets, her speech slurred, her world drawing in on herself as she remained confined to one spot, spaced out like a dosser lying asleep on the pavement. It was hard to believe that my mother had been a beautiful woman at one point in time. I remember my father picking up a cherished old framed picture of her once, before they got married. It was standing up proudly on the ornate chestnut dresser that was covered in carved leaves and pomegranates. The radiant woman was smiling so brightly in the photograph. I could see my father smile longingly at the picture, as if he wanted to drag that woman out of the photograph, the woman who should rarely be his wife, not the shadow, ghostly, vacant mannequin that professed to be his wife, but was more like a stuffed animal from a taxidermist, barely alive in its own skin, vacant in the body. I remember I caught him crying as the tears streamed down his face, which he didn't want me to see, but I saw them. Now the remnant of what was left of my mother lived in our house daily, always smelt of booze, slurred on her words, looked like a tramp you would find on a street corner. Her once exquisitely autumn-coloured red hair had all but faded. It lay dull, matted around her face in tangled knots. Her face was shrunken inwards, the skin clung tightly to the skull. Her cheekbones were like sunken hollows, her eyes rimmed by dark circles, like someone who'd been deprived of sleep for a very long time. Her body, stick-thin, was just skin and bones. Her clothes clung to her emaciated skeleton like rags. If you had spotted her in a grocery store, you would most certainly have thought she was painfully thin, possibly suffering from anorexia or some other eating disorder. If you had observed her in a bottle store, you would have known that she was a drunk. My parents slept in separate rooms. They were like two passing ships in the night. I knew that I never wanted to become my mother. She was a walking tragedy on legs, a story where there was no happy ending. My father begged me, he begged Jasmine as well, to never ever drink. He was so terribly afraid that we would end up repeating, recreating the bitter cycle of my mother's life, her tragedy. Alcoholic addiction, it runs in households, he informed us. I've done my research on the matter. I've learnt that there can be a genetic disposition to addictions running in families. I don't want to lose the both of you, like I've lost your mother. Promise me, will you, that you will never, never drink alcohol? I'm so desperately afraid if you start, you won't be able to stop. When my father had begged me not to drink alcohol, I was completely on board with the idea. There was nothing in the world about this lethal cocktail that could ever seduce me, for I had been witness to what it can do to your lives. It had robbed me of my mother. I didn't want to be a carbon copy of her one day, when I got married, raising my own children, and then recreating what my mother had done for our own lives. That would be a train smash waiting to happen, all over again. I promise you, Dad, I said, I will never drink. Jasmine, my older sister, looked more determined than I had done. I hate booze of any kind. I see it as a demon that steals, kills and destroys, she said. You didn't have to ask me not to drink, Dad. I was determined never to go down that path when I saw what it had done to Mother. I'll never allow not even so much as a sip of fizzy champagne, even at my own birthday bash, to titillate my taste buds ever. I'll never drink. I don't want to end up like Mother. Good girls, he said, kissing us both affectionately on our foreheads. I knew my father was right about addictive personality, as throughout my life I had gone through addictions of my own with certain food groups where I would eat one thing for weeks at a time. I couldn't afford to allow alcohol to become one of those addictions, holding me to ransom like a gun to the temple. Back to the party. There was the young man. He'd returned from the bar. He was holding a glass of lime and lemonade in his hand. The ice tinkled in the glass. He beckoned for me, by bowing his head, to leave the dance floor, to join him at the table. "So, what's your name?" he asked me, handing me an iced glass of lime and lemonade, with a sprig of mint on the top. "Thanks," I said. "Phew, it's thirsty work out there doing all that dancing. Goodness gracious, I'm exhausted. My name is Lily," I said, knocking back a large sip of the refreshing drink. "Oh, this is so good. I had no idea I was this thirsty." "Pretty name. I like it. My name's Ronald, but you can call me Ron if you like. Well, all my friends do, that is." "I've seen you around before, on the campus, hanging around with the engineering fraternity. Is that right?" I asked. "Got it in a nutshell," he said, grinning. "I've seen you around too. You caught my eye a long time ago. I was very glad to see you on the dance floor. I'm not going to kid. I've wanted to meet you for quite some time. You've got such magnificently beautiful auburn hair. It caught my eye immediately. I must confess, I've always been a sucker for a redhead. Are your friends here with you tonight?" "Yes, you see the blonde girl over there, the one wearing the black hat with the purple sequins? That's my friend." "Oh, yes, I see her. She looks rather bladdered." "Yes, well, she does tend to get rather drunk. She's my best friend Lacey. My sister Jasmine is around here somewhere. I don't actually see her. You'll notice her because she's got auburn hair as well. You can't miss her. Oh, there she is, over there. Do you see the slender girl wearing the silver dress? That's Jasmine." "Very pretty too," he said approvingly. "Must run in the genes, the good looks, I mean. May I ask you, why don't you drink?" "Oh, it's a long story. I'd rather not go into it now. It'll bore you silly." "Another drink," he said, noting my empty glass. He seemed rather eager to refill it, I thought. Full marks for being so attentive. I nodded. He returned with reinforcements. I knocked back the delicious lemonade like water. I was beginning to become quite giggly, for no reason at all, as there was nothing that was particularly funny, but for some reason I found everything amusing. "What are you laughing at?" asked Ron. "Your shoes! They're hilarious." He ignored my comment. "Do you live in Charleston?" "No, I live outside Charleston, in a rural area." "Nice. Very nice. Some of the countrified areas around West Virginia are spectacularly beautiful. I do envy you living in the countryside. I'm stuck in the centre of town in an apartment, with the only bit of nature being a houseplant." All of a sudden my head began to become dizzy, floaty, giddy, swimmy even. I felt like I was on a ship at sea. Everything was beginning to rock. For a moment I felt completely confused, disorientated, dazed, wondering what on earth was happening to me. I didn't like the light-headed, woozy feeling that had suddenly overcome me. Even my words began to slur rather like my mother's do. I could see the hazy blur of Ron sitting opposite me. He appeared to smile, but he looked like a faded, obscure figure in a very cloudy photograph that you couldn't see very clearly. He kept going in and out of focus as everything whirled and spinned around me, almost as if I was on a roller coaster, going around and around, spinning, wheeling, twirling and pirouetting. I'm sorry, I said. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel very strange. Quite peculiar, actually. You'll get used to it. I asked them to put a tot of vodka in your drink. It's called being a little tipsy. You'll enjoy the feeling after a while. Nothing wrong with that at all. It'll help you unwind, go with the flow, relax. But why? I told you I don't drink. I don't drink. I became belligerent. I began to hit him with the back of my purse. I don't drink. I don't drink. Are you for real? Stop hitting me with your purse, will you? Listen, everybody drinks at these events. It's all a bit of fun. It's a great way to relax. Helps us to have a good time. This way we can get to know each other better. A lot better without that awkwardness. What's going on here? Said my sister Jasmine, who caught sight of me hitting a man with the back of my purse. She turned around to look at me, her face a picture of horror and indignation. What have you done to my sister? She said, staring at Ron with eyes as wide as saucers. Look at her. She's completely drunk. Look what you've done. I assume she told you she doesn't drink. But you spiked her lemonade, didn't you? You did, didn't you? When a girl tells you she doesn't want to drink, she doesn't want to drink. Get it? Get it into your thick skull or not? Oh, come on. Get a life. It's only a bit of fun. What's a drop of alcohol ever going to do to anyone? It never ever harmed a soul. A bit of fun? A bit of fun? She shrieked, moving towards Ron, slapping him across the face with her hand. I'll have you know, what you call a bit of fun has literally ruined our lives, has robbed us of our mother, has caused my father so much sadness and grief and despair. You've absolutely no idea what you're talking about, and you've no idea what you've done to my sister. You should be ashamed of yourself, and you call yourself a gentleman? Are you kidding? Oh, stop being so dramatic. It's only a drink, for goodness sake. My sister spat at Ron in disgust, then lifted me up from my seat, escorting me away from the bewildered man. Don't come anywhere near my sister again, she growled, or you'll have me to deal with. And believe me, it's not going to be pretty. We're going home, Lily. Don't you dare worry. I think that idiot spiked your drink. He's a complete loser. Oh, people like him, they make me sick. I don't feel good, Jazz. Everything is spinning. My head is throbbing. I feel as if I'm going to pass out. What's happening to me? Jazz, I'm scared. You're drunk, Lily, that's all. It'll pass, I promise you. My older sister held me up, as if I was a broken mannequin that needed steadying. She walked with me, clasping me up with her arms, guiding me towards the taxi rank. I could feel her rising level of angst. I'd never seen her so affronted before. I noticed her pale skin was crimson with rage. I could feel she was shaking with umbrage. Where to, miss? Asked the taxi driver, peering out of the window at us. We want to go back home, said my sister, giving the man our home address. The taxi man looked at me warily. She's not drunk, sir, I promise you, she said, lying to the taxi driver with a very straight, determined face, while she helped me into the back seat, climbing in beside me. Don't worry, she whispered to me encouragingly. We're going home right now. Everything's going to be fine, I promise you that. You can go straight to bed and sleep off all that alcohol, and you'll feel as right as rain in the morning. The taxi drove seamlessly through the lighted streets of Charleston, but as it veered down some of those back uneven country dirt roads, you could feel every single jolt, bump and thump as the car rubber wheels glided over the tumultuous terrain. I could hear the taxi driver throwing a few curses in the front seat. Bloody hell, he said. This is a dreadful road. Sorry about that, sir, said my sister. It's a little bit off the beaten track out here. You don't say, said the taxi driver sarcastically. It's the middle of nowhere out here. My stomach was churning inside me like the washing machine in mid-cycle. The taxi jolts were causing waves of nausea to travel from my stomach to the back of my throat. Suddenly I knew that I wanted to be sick, violently sick. I feel like I'm going to throw up, I said to my sister. I want to be sick. I think I'm going to vomit. My words caused the taxi driver to grind to a sudden halt. Get out of the car right now. I'm not going to have anybody getting sick over my brand new leather seats. Out, he screamed. I climbed out of the car, racing towards the nearest tree as I began to hurl up the contents of my stomach. I could hear the taxi driver yelling at my sister. Why did you lie to me? Your sister is drunk as a skunk. I'm sorry, but you wouldn't have taken us otherwise. The next thing I knew, the driver pressed down his foot on the accelerator, driving away with Jasmine in the back seat of the car. I was abandoned, left alone, deserted, all on my own in this dark wasteland. The bile in the back of my throat was bitter, vinegary, acidic, sharp, and hideously sour. I continued to spew out my guts, my body shaking violently, my forehead sweating profusely, my stomach twisting in knots, as I rejected everything that was left in my body. I continued to retch, but there was nothing left to eliminate. Finally, I was able to compose myself as I discerned that I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, now a lot more sober. I had no way of knowing whereabouts I was. I had a natural instinctive fear of the dark, and on this quiet, solitary road, without a soul in sight, I was now trapped in my worst, most horrifying nightmare. I waited on the roadside for a long while, hoping and praying with all my heart that my sister would return after having skillfully persuaded the driver to come back to collect me. But to no avail. No cars purred down that long, lonely country road. No one came to my rescue. I was truly alone. I decided to follow the road, for at the very least, if my father came back to look for me after Jasmine told him what had happened, he would know exactly where to find me. Everything was cloaked in a thick blanket of inky darkness on this treacherous night. The ivory-coloured moon, the twinkling silvery stars, seemed obscure, almost as if their dazzling light had all but faded and been turned down to low on a dimmer switch, offering little to no illumination. The whole countryside appeared menacing, foreboding, unwelcoming, predatory, while the whistling wind meandered through the tall trees, its feisty gusts causing the graceful branches to bob up and down. I was painfully aware of every rustle, every creak, every crunch, which ultimately made me jump out of my skin hundreds of times. It was then that I realised that the usual sounds of the night were now extinguished like the blown-out candles of a birthday cake, for the sounds of the crickets chirping, the croaks of the frogs, were all but absent. I knew that even the howl of a fox or the hoot of an owl would bring me a small measure of reassurance. The darkness was cloying, thick, oppressive. It clung to me like an extra garment on my skin. It felt as if there were bricks on my feet, as negotiating my way over a road strewn with loose stones, wearing an inappropriate pair of golden sandals, even during daylight hours, was an obstacle course, but at night it was an accident waiting to happen. I boldly took off my golden sandals, carrying them in my hands, walking down that long dirt road in my bare feet, hoping that they weren't going to be pierced by a random thorn or splinter. I do not know a time when I was more afraid. I so needed to get home. I could not even see where I was actually going. I was so frightened. With every shadow that moved through the trees, my blood would grow as cold as ice, my heart would thump in my chest, and my pulse would race. For a second I could feel eyes on me, but I glanced around quickly, seeing nothing. I was now certain I was being stalked by something, but by what? Then out of the dark shadows emerged a dark, towering form, darker than the night. I could see the hefty, solid, firm silhouette of something very burly, very tall, very substantial, and steady on its feet. But what was it? Was it a bear, I wondered? No, it couldn't be. It definitely wasn't a bear. All of a sudden, a shaft of moonlight danced on the creature's shoulders, illuminating its face. I was staring at the face of a man, but a man whose face appeared to be attached to a solid body made of long, flowing hair. This creature was half man, half beast. What else could he be? As long as I have lived on this earth, I will tell you, I have never beheld a kinder face. Those deep-set dark eyes were enveloped in such a loving warmth. They were emitting a red eyeshine, regarding me with such a deep, genuine concern. Even though the creature spoke no words, his protective energy swathed me in a blanket of security that cast aside my fear in a heartbeat. I know it sounds strange, preposterous even, nonsensical, but I knew I could completely surrender my trust to this creature. I assure you, you would have done the same in exactly the same circumstances had you seen him. The only way I can actually describe him to you is like Aslan, the lion in The Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe. When you met him, you immediately felt at ease. You knew that he was in charge. You knew that he was powerful. You knew that he would protect you. He had that awe-inspiring, regal, protective and loving energy about him. How could I not feel safe in his charge? He walked beside me, escorting me down the long road. He became my night vision, the vision that I clearly lacked on this night. I felt as if someone had placed a warm blanket over me, switched on the light, and handed me a cup of hot, steaming cocoa, as my fear dissipated as fast as the willowy smoke from a chimney. I knew instinctively he was taking me to safety, hopefully to some form of human habitation, where I could get help, but I certainly knew that I could trust him with all my heart. All of a sudden something pierced my foot. I let out a shrill cry. I immediately got down on the ground and felt around with my fingers to see if I could find the offending thorn that had pierced my skin. I found it. I was surprised to see it was a thin sliver of glass. I could see the critter realised how ill-equipped I was to walk in the darkness. I was blind as a bat, with feet as soft as a baby's bottom. The creature squatted on the ground, indicating for me to climb onto his shoulders. I didn't hesitate. The weight of the world was now lifted off me as the creature glided with me on his back. He ran down the long dirt road, almost as if he was floating on air. It was seamless, fluid, graceful, without the precarious jolts and bumps that I'd experienced in the taxi earlier. For if indeed the taxi driver had driven as smoothly as this creature glided across the ground, I would definitely not have vomited. I felt exhilarated as he ran, with the wind blowing through my hair. I was so enjoying this ride. The best ride I've ever had in my life, better than a horse, better than a camel, better than an elephant, for indeed I have ridden them all, and they fail miserably against the ride on this man-like beast. All of a sudden I heard a truck driving down the road. I thought it might be the taxi or my father. It was my father. I was so glad. The bright beaming headlights of his truck lit up the creature's shoulders. That was when my father saw me sitting on them, with a huge beam on my face, as I began to wave him down. "Dad! Dad! It's me! Daddy! Daddy!" My father's face was one I shall never forget. He looked mortified, astonished, amazed. If a face could say 1,000 words, his was saying, "What the heck?" I'm sure he thought I was being abducted by this strange beast. I tapped the creature on the shoulders. He squatted down, letting me down to the ground. I ran towards my father's truck, while the creature stood there watching. "What is that thing that you were sitting on?" said my father, who was trembling, as I climbed into the passenger seat next to him and gave him a huge hug. Why were you sitting on its shoulders? He didn't hurt you, did he?" "He's a creature with a human face, Dad. He was helping me. Look at his face. Please, Dad, I begged. Look at his face. Look at his face." My father looked directly at the creature's face. It was standing there watching us leave. I waved at it. In the light of my father's headlights, it was nodding its head at me and at my father. It then turned around and glided away and was gone. My father turned around to me and said, "My God, that is the face of an angel." I told you I could trust him, Dad. To cut a long story short, the taxi driver dropped my sister Jasmine at home. She told my father that I'd been abandoned by the taxi driver on the side of the road because I was vomiting. She never told him my drinks had been laced with vodka by a young man who was intent on getting me drunk. He would have been so gutted by that revelation, so we spared him the details of the horror of finding out what had really happened to me that night. Naturally, he was furious that the taxi driver had dumped me on the side of the road. Over many years, my father has often talked about the strange creature he saw, with the angelic face that carried me on his shoulders. He believes it was an angel. I know, of course, now that the creature in question was a Bigfoot. While I appreciate that many people have had negative encounters with Bigfoots, mine was a very positive experience that has changed my life. To date, I've never drank a drop of alcohol, neither has Jasmine, my sister, for we are not willing to risk drinking a substance that has the potential to destroy our lives, especially if we do have addictive personalities, which we both do. Unfortunately, my mother died in 1992 from cirrhosis of the liver, which was desperately sad, but for us she died a long time ago, when the alcohol robbed us of her presence in our lives. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, that was a fabulous story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.